all took some time off.
There was some
A
vacation.
hurricane or so.
That wasn't vacation. But anyway, all right. Good friend, someone that's been here before, but to give us an update on some of the great work they're doing, promoting the city, and kind of, it takes a whole lot of people to keep this city in the forefront of everyone's minds. And I think when we go out of town and somebody says, what do they always say? They go, New Orleans, that's awesome, or I had a great time, or this or that or the other. It's all these different non-governmental organizations that are doing that work. Besides just us and all the great things we tell them, because we never complain. To out-of-towners, rule 1. So anyway, one of those people is Louis David, who's CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance. So welcome, Louis.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Yeah, so grab whatever's comfortable there for you. And if you would turn your little mic pack so that the light goes green instead of orange.
Okay. That, oh wait, no, I pressed sync.
Oh, boy.
Sorry.
Oh, let's see.
Now it's red.
Oh, went green.
There we go.
Cody fixed it. All right. Okay, so you've been CEO now of New Orleans Business Alliance for 3 years?
Almost a year. I've been at the
How did I miss
organization
that?
9 years.
That's what it is. I knew you'd
I
been
was
there.
served as the temporary CEO for about 9 months. So it's been almost a year, full seat.
Well, congratulations. What's
you.
one of the things a year in that you're most proud of that y'all are doing?
Most proud of, and this probably doesn't have a whole lot. I'll give you 2.
Okay.
One of the really cool things that we've been a part of over the past couple months is the Super Bowl Supplier Diversity Program. The Super Bowl comes in every year to a different city, obviously. But last time when they were in New Orleans, there was a Supplier Diversity Program. That's to figure out how do we get local vendors involved in all of the business that comes with the Super Bowl, and not just with the NFL, but like with Pepsi and Frito-Lay and all their approved partners, but then also everybody else who's doing business. So the Supplier Diversity Program was really beefed up this year, and a lot of outreach was made. Previous years, you had to be already certified as minority-owned or women-owned or veteran-owned. This year, you did not have to already have that certification. They said, apply, get in, we'll help you get that certification, and you just need to have it by the time, I think kind of now-ish. But these companies have had 4 months in the program.
Yeah, and that's
to
a big
work for that
deal. That's a big
certification.
deal. I used to have a highway safety company, work with DOTD, and the whole DBE process is miserable. And it can take years. And I think to have a free consultant that's helping you do that so that for a deadline is a big deal for a lot of local businesses.
Yeah, so that was really exciting, and that was they did about double what they had hoped to do as far as getting companies to apply, as well as getting companies involved in it. Everything they tell us about it, it's kind of a bummer. It's secret under lock and key until the day after the Super Bowl, because they don't want other people to be using those vendors. They want, if they've got an awesome DBE fence vendor, they want all their capacity to be able to be there for NFL and Super Bowl vendors. The cool thing is, the day after the Super Bowl, they're giving this list to the economic development community. We're working together to figure out, us, GNO Inc., the City of New Orleans. This was also a regional program, so our partners at Jedcode, St. Tammany. How do we keep this lasting forever? And then not only just for events, but we're talking with a company that's looking at making a significant investment in New Orleans. And I said, well, if you have any diverse business goals, I'm going to have this book for you so that
tried and tested people.
Yeah, that the NFL approved.
Yeah, they're kind of a big deal.
They are, a little bit. So that's been cool, but on the corporate side of just what we do on a regular basis, it's, as everybody here knows, New Orleans is all about relationships. Yeah. So in this year, we've been, rebuilding a lot of our internal relationships with the city council, with the mayor's office, a lot of, so in other cities, like my colleagues in Baton Rouge or Lafayette or Shreveport, most of the economic development funding is coming from property tax millages, or in Jedco and Jefferson, it comes from a fee on building permits. So you've got guaranteed revenue that's coming in through the door. That's not really the case in New Orleans. We just kind of fund things different ways. So I have to go to the council, ask for our funding every year. So getting that approved was a big deal. Right. But also a lot of philanthropy in New Orleans relies on national philanthropy. So we have big support from the Kellogg Foundation as well as JP Morgan Chase. A lot of that history of support goes back to Katrina. And making sure those relationships are strong and that they're seeing what we're doing in New Orleans and more importantly valuing it. So that's in y'all's business, I'd imagine it's like the relationship part is 90% of it. Help
some of us, I get kind of lost sometimes. There's, Michael Hecht, Geno Inc., who's got these I don't know, LED, Louisiana Economic Development for the state. Like, where do you fall in all this? Is it just simply we're kind of the mayor's economic development arm? Is it that simple or is it not?
So we are just working in Orleans Parish. So I'm working for the mayor and the city council. So that's always fun.
They get along.
They
so
always
it's perfect.
get along.
It's
I know,
easy.
it's great.
Like, no big deal. Who cares?
It's always easy. But so we work just in the parish. So JEDCO is just in Jefferson. St. Tammany Economic Development Foundation is just there.
So those are your peers?
Those are our peers.
Because JEDCO also gets like the SBA loan stuff. Do you get that?
No.
Y'all are out of
they have
that.
a number of programs that I would love to have or that I would love to start in Orleans.
Yeah.
But part of it is that they get about $3 million a year off of building permit revenues in Jefferson Parish. That just comes every year.
Just guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Mailbox money.
Yeah. They also own some properties. So, lots of times political priorities are different in different parishes. But Geno Inc. is at the regional level, so they're looking at things at the regional level that impact all of us. A lot of that has historically been workforce, because as we know, people who live in Orleans don't only look for jobs in Orleans and vice versa. So they do a lot of like workforce development, workforce training, especially getting all of our universities on the same page. And universities and community colleges, everybody, high schools, hey, here are the job needs. Here's where we think the jobs are coming. Let's get on a path to provide this training. They also do a lot of work, which we don't do, with advocacy and policy. So they're doing a lot of work on
state
homeowners
level
insurance. They're also doing a lot of work on, in Washington on insurance. They were pretty instrumental in the flood insurance reforms of about 10, 15 years ago. So they do a lot of that work that's, very regional in nature that benefits all of us. And then LED is Louisiana Economic Development. That's a state agency. They've had lots of changes. The head of LED, as well as all the other state agencies, are appointed by the governor. So when we had the governor change in January, we got a new state economic development head. Her name is Susan Bourgeois Bonnet. Susan Bourgeois Bonnet.
And she wiped out Michael's office, basically, right?
Yeah, she hired a lot of people from Michael Hecht. The interesting fact, and people are always, and I have done research, and no one has proven me wrong. She is the first head of economic development representing the state from the New Orleans area in over 40 years. So we are the largest metropolitan area in the state, by far produce the largest share of GDP. We haven't had someone who can turn on and watch Channel 4 News at 10 o'clock at the end of their day heading up our state's economy. Also, of her leadership team, which is about 9 people, 3 of them live in New Orleans or in the area. Previous administration, that was 0. Even the previous administration to that, it was 0. So New Orleans area has long been underrepresented in Louisiana economic development for lots of political reasons.
Sure. So this might make you squirm a bit, so just take the 5th if you need to, because I know you've got a political role to play. But I think that there's a really complicated relationship we're all having with the governor, whether you're for him or not. Typically, the governor of Louisiana does not want to be looking like they're kowtowing to New Orleans. And if you're a Republican governor, you did not carry Orleans Parish or come close to it. They didn't get you elected, so you stay away. And then if you are a Democrat, like John Bel Edwards was, you're kind of like, oh, I gotta kiss a lot of babies in North Louisiana and love on those people more and not look like I'm kowtowing to the New Orleans people. And we kind of get a halfway deal out of it all when we're one of the bigger drivers in the state. I don't know. I know that Shreveport Airport's coming along, but we're the biggest driver, and now we've got a governor, love him or hate him, who put a police troop down here, who made a whole New Orleans team on his transition and put a mixed group of people in to reform things, and then puts a New Orleans head of economic development, which is really kind of blasphemy in my view.
I know.
In the past.
Right. That our biggest industries weren't really represented by state government or didn't have that priority. And Susan was previous board chair of GNO Inc., and she lives on the North Shore, but I think grew up in New Orleans, so is very familiar with what makes the New Orleans economy tick. And how we play into the rest of the state. So you're right, they're always going to have to balance, but it's crazy that we haven't had this kind of representation in Baton Rouge until now.
So what do you think that's going to mean? Is that ultimately we're seeing crime reductions, and I don't think Troop NOLA is the sole cause. I think it's a part. I think there's lots of things helping there. But do you think that this spotlight the governor has, that he spends a large portion of his week, I think, on New Orleans issues, is it going to stay post-Super Bowl, you think? And are we going to see a long-term change from it?
I think
that's positive.
Anything in politics, that's a long-term change. I think the biggest thing to watch out for that could be giant long-term change that will be being discussed next month is all of the tax reforms proposals that are out there. I mean, there are proposals to get rid of the state historic tax credits.
That we're voting on November 2nd?
No, that this is all going into a special session that the legislature will be discussing in November. So this is always a great reminder to, as a real estate community, be friends and, your state legislators, they're really in your neighborhood. I saw a couple of them last night at the Caesars grand opening. They like to be seen, but I always tell people that if you're doing business in someone's district, council, state rep, state senate, make sure they know who you are and make sure they know the impact that you're having on their constituency.
So the 25% state historic tax credit is up for renewal, basically. Or it's on the chopping block, potentially.
There is a proposal that basically puts every state tax incentive on the chopping block. So the film incentives.
That worked last time.
Film incentives, which unfortunately are very New Orleans centric, so that's going to have a tough time.
Well, we're sorry they don't want to film in Monroe. They get to pick where they go. They have free will. We don't decide where they get to spend the money.
They get a higher incentive if they shoot outside of the New Orleans metro area. So, but probably the biggest ones for us in the New Orleans area: state historic tax credits, film. We have very generous 25% tax credits on software development, which has really driven the growth. It has really grown a software development industry in New Orleans where we didn't really have much of one before that incentive program started.
We have a software development industry?
Yes.
Tell us
DXC
more.
is downtown. They employ like 400 people in New Orleans.
That's what they're doing there? They're coding?
Yeah.
Huh.
Now, they're remote like a lot of your people, but they're Louisiana residents, and
we're hybrid.
Like
we're everywhere.
80% of them are in the New Orleans area.
Huh.
But I have a friend actually who just got a job. She was, I'm sure everybody heard, Lucid. Was the big unicorn, sold for over $1 billion. They have reduced their footprint in New Orleans. There's this second crop of technology companies where I just connected a friend who got laid off in the Lucid layoffs, who got a job at this company called ProKeep, which is building communication software for like AC contractors and lighting contractors and all that kind of stuff. So kind of taking those,
interesting
digital low businesses and giving them some ability to compete with, tools that like a Home Depot has or whatever. But so we've got this crop of like 3 or 4 companies that are about 100, 200 employees in New Orleans, most of them homegrown, most of them not going to the office every day. No. So you don't like see them all at lunch wearing their shirts at whatever restaurants next to the office. So that in itself has made economic development very different post-COVID, because it used to be one of the big drivers was, yeah, we want to incentivize, tech jobs because, high wage, high growth jobs, but also it puts people in downtown and it puts people going to those restaurants, and it's going to make people live in the apartment complexes nearby, and just the world has changed. So all of that math is different, and that's something that Davon Barber at the Downtown Development District is trying to figure out. What do we do with these buildings that used to be offices that we don't see a direct line to a demand for in the next 10, 20 years? But that's not a New Orleans.
No, I mean,
that's an everywhere.
If anything, we're lucky because we have a small inventory.
Yep.
Relatively speaking, we don't have millions and millions and millions of square feet like a lot of cities do. And I think return to work might be closer. I mean, a lot of companies are laying the gauntlet down that 2025 is the year of full return to work, and I think that that's helpful.
I think the 2 biggest kind of hybrid folks in New Orleans are Entergy. I think they're still at 2 or 3 days a week, and then Shell. But I think Shell's new building.
Once Shell builds that new building, they're going to say you all have to be here.
I don't know. I think
they're paying
kind of
for it,
building it to be like this, as like a WeWork hybrid, amenity-rich environment that makes people want to come in. But a lot of those people, live in different parts of the metro area, and just that commute. I mean, the getting someone to commute from Mandeville or Belle Chase or even Laplace into downtown every day, 5 days a week until 5 o'clock.
It's a bygone era.
Like, I think that's over.
Yeah, I agree with you. So one of the things we track here, and we talk to, we're talking to Royce Duplessis, who gives us regular briefings. We talk about the number of U-Hauls coming in versus leaving, and that metric. And I think that is such a simple, we're always looking for data points. And what's the one data point we can think of that tells us the health of a state? Mm-hmm. And it scares me to death that we cannot get that one to look any better. In fact, it might be going the wrong direction. What can we do? What is on the horizon, to fix things? I'm sure that's one of the things you all, maybe you don't talk about that metric, but that's the overall goal, right? And I challenged Royce. I said, I'm sure the legislature talked about this the whole session, that was just the basis of every conversation, and unfortunately it was not even close.
I went to the legislature. In fact, I found a picture on my phone the other day. I went one day, they do like an hour of like, Jeff Dusan, it is Jeff's day, and we proclaim him. And so I'm waiting for all that to be done. And someone is ushering in like a large pig on a leash. And it was for like, Louisiana Hog Farmers Association Day. And I was like, great, with all the insurance and all the everything, But I'm sure they did some work.
Brilliant animals. But what do we do? What is really I'm sure if you were trying to tell your whole team of how many people?
We got 9.
Okay, you're doing all this with 9 people. Mm-hmm. Jeez. So you're trying to get your team to focus on something. I'm sure this is the one thing you all really want to see change. What is the play? What do we do? Who's turned this around in the past? Where do we look to kind of figure out a solution here? Or is this really just we have to do a million little things right to get to a bigger thing?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's a million little things right. The governor believes that the biggest little thing that he can do, and it's not a little thing, but is the tax reforms. And the idea is, so we have a lot of tax incentives in Louisiana on businesses because we have a very complex tax code. So the idea is take all the incentives out and have a very simple one. Well, that means a lot of things written into law go away, and everybody says, well, what about my industry, or what about my little thing? And Louisiana is, if you go back and look back to the Huey P. Long days, I mean, we have extremely generous homeowner exemption or homestead exemption.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
We'll never have good schools because of it.
We are a state that wants everything for free, and then when we're offered to pay for it, we often say no, thank you. I'll do my own.
Right.
And it's going to take a change in that mentality. I think it is helpful that every part of the state is seeing population loss. So it's no longer just like this is a New Orleans or East Baton Rouge
Slidell
Parish
or
thing
something.
or whatever. And when you look at demographics across the state, we have about 5 or 6 parishes that are growing. They're getting people from next door. And sometimes in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, it is people leaving the inner cities and going out to the suburbs. But man, I grew up in Lafayette, and Lafayette's growing, but it's all people from New Iberia, Opelousas, and Abbeville who are like, I don't want to deal with the really, lower services at the hospital here. And there's not as many restaurants, and I want my kids to go to school.
Roberts Cove just isn't what it used to be.
Right, yeah. People just
Let's
don't.
go to the big city.
Yeah, people are,
Not going to rice farm.
Yeah, leaving, these rural areas for tons of reasons. And then Thibodaux is growing crazily. People are leaving Houma in droves, and that's mostly property insurance. And just lack of...
Is better in Thibodaux?
Yeah, it is, because you're north of Highway 90. And you're on higher ground, and there's just been really a lack of investment you'll see shopping centers destroyed by, was it Ida? Yeah. And man, if a national, if a shopping center with national tenants hasn't rebuilt in 3 years, then that's
bad sign.
Not a fantastic sign for that market.
So what can we do to help this? What can we do to help you all and help promote what you're doing and be a communication multiplier for you?
So y'all are great resources, and I love how y'all have these meetings and invite people like us to come and talk about what's going on in New Orleans. Y'all are our best. It is a million different little messages out on the street. So talking about the positive things that are going on in New Orleans, and we did chat a little bit. I see the train. The port's expansion in St. Bernard is not a nice to have; it's a must have. And I think the business community is finally the business community is definitely getting around that. But I think the small opposition that there is to it has kind of figured that out.
Right. People who live in St. Bernard don't want traffic.
Right.
It's the primary pollution, that's more whatever. So, but that's got to happen because we're out of space between Felicity and Napoleon.
More importantly, they are estimating that the ships that will be calling on New Orleans in 2 to 3 years won't be able to get under the Mississippi River Bridge. So Houston has no air clearance issues. Mobile has no air clearance issues. New Orleans does. And we've seen a lot of container traffic shift to Mobile over the past 15, 20 years. And one of the reasons why is Alabama's only got one port. So they funnel all their money into state-funded improvements at the Port of Mobile. Whereas we've got,
and they've eaten our lunch.
Yeah,
they really have, and they're a lot faster to the Gulf than we are. I mean, they're
you save a little bit of time on that, but we're at a better location for hopping on rail, much better, because we've got way more rail connectivity than they do. You can only kind of go up one line or across. We can fan out in all the directions.
We're one of the biggest rail cities, outside of Chicago in the country, right?
Yeah, because we're in the middle. And everything used to come here, and now we're connected to all of it. But
don't think of that very often.
All the crops. I mean, think about everything that is grown in the United States between Ohio and Nebraska. If it's grain or things like that, most of that comes through the Port of New Orleans when it's exported.
And we send the best chemicals to the rest of the country.
They send us the best raw materials. We send out the best chemicals.
I love it. And we get the petroleum straight from the Gulf, fresh every day.
But I will say, and on that note, when people of course, there's a lot of concerns about chemical manufacturing and stuff like that. But the thing that makes us great for chemical manufacturing also makes us great for renewables manufacturing and sustainable aviation fuel. There's already, at the Chalmette refinery, they're already producing some sustainable aviation fuel. So the things that make us this great transportation hub aren't just limited to oil and gas. They can work for all these other energy sources as we start to like figure that out. But it's going to take us a while to figure that out.
So key messages: port expansion, software is developed here, industry we probably didn't even think we had. We are giving more and more opportunity and being extremely purposeful for small minority women-owned businesses. Got one more for me?
Wait, I just had it, and crime. I mean, crime is down. Like I think
third
murders-
fastest drop in the country. Right?
Yeah. So that's huge. I ran into the police chief the other day. She doesn't know who I am, but I stopped her because literally the day before I had a conversation with a national retailer about the drop in crime. And so I stopped her. I was like, thank you. I've been using like your great stats. And it's just kind of been a culture shift there. That I hope is not just like a one-person culture shift, and I hope that's a sustainable thing. That's probably the biggest thing that we need to do in Louisiana is stop looking at like our next mayor, our next governor, our next police chief, our next senator as like our savior. We need to realize that like all.
Yeah, it kind of happened. I mean, it kind of happened in a way. We've got a lot better leadership. We've never had such an active city council that's not. That I think is active for the right reasons. I don't always agree with their methods or decisions, but they're at least active and engaged for the right reasons. It looks like we're going to have a mayor next that is, we're going to probably have two great choices. I don't know. I think there's a lot to look forward to.
We have a really young and active New Orleans delegation in Baton Rouge.
That's true.
And so yeah, I think there's definitely things to look forward to. Oh, and then I'll add in an extra, like biotech. NOLA BA holds the charter for the biodistrict, which I just like to say it's a fancy HOA because they had no revenue whatsoever for the first 20 years. They will now be getting city tax revenue as well as state tax revenue from purchases in that district. So the first revenue will be going to quality of life things like signage and park benches. So they'll operate in a really similar way to the downtown development district as like a clean, safe, beautiful, way to kind of pull all of the medical center area together, especially with the new Ochsner Medical Center, Ochsner Xavier, and that'll be at Benson Tower. So we'll have 3 med schools across the street from each other with a funded bio district that is there to make that part of town better.
And besides trivia and Lowry, do we have people doing anything?
We do. The New Orleans Bio Innovation Center has got, I haven't been there in a little while, sorry. They have a big pitch challenge next week. But that's a big part of it because we have had great infrastructure. After Katrina, all the infrastructure got replaced.
Just tell everybody real quick. I've been in the Bio Innovation Center many times. Tell them what's there, because I don't think many people realize if you've got a client who comes in that's a scientist or that wants to put a business here and they need lab space, for instance. I mean, what's available down there for them?
It's kind of like a WeWork for people in the biotech world.
Yeah.
So they've got wet lab space, which is very difficult to rent in small increments. So you can rent it for a couple of hours and perform your research.
This was a super expensive building to build.
It was very expensive.
Way pre-COVID. It's post-Katrina, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And it's everything you need basically to start a biotech company.
And we've done a really good job of putting a lot of money in our infrastructure. So NOBIC, the new UMC hospital, the new VA hospital, Tulane's putting a lot of money in their facilities. We haven't done a great job on the programming side of how do we fund the work that goes on in these buildings to make sure that research is increasing so that those researchers can spin those companies out and that can create jobs anchored in New Orleans. So that's something that we're working with the new LED team on, and the person leading innovation is a New Orleans person, Josh Flag, who has done lots of work in the bio world. So in the previous administration, I think it was we built all the hospitals.
Yeah.
Now let it
Right.
roll. which is a big achievement.
Sure.
Um,
But they're letting it roll internally.
yeah, yeah. So now it's kind of like, how do we push the programming to make sure we use these buildings to the fullest? Of their
Cool. I love hearing that. Tina, you had a question?
I didn't have a question, but you were talking about police department, and the other day I was at an event, and Susan Hudson was there,
Mhm.
and I had a friend over the last couple of months that experienced the OPC firsthand,
Mhm.
and it was frightful. But anyway, I was talking to one of Susan Hudson's,
The jail you were talking about.
the jail.
Okay.
But anyway, on that note, talking about how changes have affected us, there was a female assistant to her who was, I don't know what, she was works for the sheriff's department. But she said that with the power change over there, how greatly it's affected the quality of life for the female employees of the OPC. OPC? OPS?
I think it's like the Orleans Parish Justice Center.
So, but
There you go,
just thinking
PJS,
about-
yeah.
She was like, I have, in the last few years that she's been here, I've had more opportunity that I never had previous.
That's awesome.
Huh.
It's like, oh, share that with me.
Yeah.
Eye-opening.
That's great. Yeah, we got a woman sheriff, woman mayor, woman city council.
Superintendent, police superintendent?
Yeah, police superintendent, head of city council. May have a woman president.
Or we won't, or we'll have the exact opposite. Okay, any other questions for Lewis before we let him go? Lauren, go ahead.
We've seen some information coming out about the effort to improve Canal Street and some of our other sort of iconic corridors. Can you just talk about some, if y'all are involved?
Yeah, there's a new Canal Street Coalition.
Yes. And I met with them the other day, and I was very afraid.
Yeah, because they didn't
And-
start with you?
No,
It
well,
kind of
no,
scares me.
because I thought they were going to say, hey, our plan is to spend all this money and we're going to try to make Dillard's open a store on Canal Street. They said neither of those things. They were like, it sounded like more of a beautification Canal Street and programming Canal Street and doing some art in windows and doing some art like on some of the buildings that may be closed. So I think and they've already raised the money for it, and they're going to start planning kind of some of their first installations
Oh, wow.
after Mardi Gras. So, and they're working closely with the Downtown Development District. So, like, I think they want to do kind of like the Magazine Street Stroll, They want to do art walks, and they want to help create more kind of placemaking on Canal Street through, a couple of events a year, but as well as some public street art, and just kind of marketing. Yeah, and when you think about that, you're like, yeah, of course. That's,
Right.
of
Canal
course
Street
we
should
should
be like
doing
number
that.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
that should be a
But
simple one.
I was really happy that their goals were not, pie in the sky, and that they weren't looking for tons of, public funding, which
Your budget.
and after Super Bowl is like not going to exist.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that group, and I think a lot of people are impressed with their plans.
Well, everybody, this is one of the guys making it happen for the city, so let's give him a big round of applause. Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you, Jeff.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. God, it's always uplifting to see. And I should say, Cody, if you're still back there, will you swap over, or I can do it since you're coming back out. Don't ignore
Leaving you hanging.
Don't ignore their website, the NOBA.org or NOLABA.org. They have a great